You've both had a background in kind of thinking about different diseases and ailments. Was this always part? And so it must be a really exciting time now as One Health kind of enters the discourse.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of trouble with One Health, but you've both got a long history of thinking about animals and disease and health. Why do you think health is an important kind of locus to think about our relationships with animals?
Oh, I can take that one on first. And just to do a little bit of digging, is that in anthropology, medical anthropology, often at the beginning of a class at an undergraduate level, we would go through some key terms such as health, disease, injury, illness, sickness. Those would be some examples. And so the one point to make was that health, in terms of the history of that word in English, comes from the notion of being hale or whole. That's the meaning of it. Uh, in French, santé has a somewhat different approach, and it has historically emphasized more the notion of functioning or what we might think of as normalcy and pathology. And so the word in English of sane or sanity comes from that root in Latin.
Mhm.
You think what happens when you put health on one side and sane or sanity side by side. I don't want to suggest that in French, santé as a word, which like French is a second language for me, but that santé means sane only. But it does highlight that even in English, different words that refer to health have different roots and somewhat different meanings. So we always need to ask the question, what, as you were saying, Claudia, what do these words mean, or what are they being made to mean as we go along? Um, um, with respect to One Health, yes, that word and term has been in use now for at least 20 years in veterinary medicine, and it's I would have to say it's probably done a lot of good, but it's also has been part of doing a lot of damage. In terms of the way thinking of the connections between human and animal health in anthropology, then the more serious work that has looked at how people have related to animals, and especially what we might think of as livestock, then there were a lot of medical or healing treatments that were practiced both with human bodies and with animal bodies. You know, that idea of a common enough physiology that you could use some of the same materials on and approaches on both is to be found pretty much anywhere where farming or livestock husbandry was practiced. And I'll just finish one more point, is to say also simultaneously what we might think of as witchcraft or magic, which also has roots with contemporary biomedicine. Also, there has been a lot of interest and concern about other animals. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So there are many kind of interconnections. When you open up the word health, animals invariably come up, whether it's animals being tested on, whether it's animals being treated, whether it's animals being included in the kind of mythology of what health is. Animals have a way of just emerging or being present when humans start to ask questions about human health.
Yes, so that veterinary medicine in lots of ways has driven the contemporary usage of One Health. That's been highlighted in previous episodes on the
Mhm.
podcast as well, and in policy circles. But the notion of human and animal health being linked together, including in Western medicine, is much older than that. So you could look at
Mhm.
Claude Bernard in the context of in French in French science, or William Osler in terms of biomedicine, being he was based mainly in Montreal and McGill, and there was a lot of interest at that time in what people sometimes called one medicine or comparative medicine, comparative physiology. Enough said. Mm.
Fascinating. Gwendolyn, do you want to add something here to how we kind of think through the connection between animals and health?
So my work, unlike Melanie's, isn't directly situated within the domain of health. I've been much more an accidental tourist, if you will, into what we might call health. But what I find fascinating about the idea of health, and we might call the framing of health, and particularly something like public health, which I think is a really unique aspect of thinking about health, is what it means when we open up these questions about who's included and who's excluded, what kinds of knowledge counts as health, and what kinds of knowledge is left to the side. So those questions around framing and representation are what we might say the public engagement with issues that involve science and technology, which is a really wordy phrase, but an important one, is where I situate most of my inquiries. So I think that it's in asking how is health defined, for whose purposes, and with what effects, is a very, very important question. And again, it's much more common nowadays within the rubric of One Health or planetary health to think about humans and animals as having conjoined activities when it comes to health. So my health is important for my dog's health, for instance, but the health of, I'll just go back to the example of beef cattle. The health of beef cattle is also really important for the health of humans in various ways, whether you're consuming that beef or whether you're part of a beef producing nation. So I think that thinking of health, not only limiting it to the human, which I think can be a really easy thing to do to privilege the human when we think about health, to open that up to the question of the animal is really important. And then I also firmly believe that place and specific cases, or even more simply, stories matter. So in tracing, how is it that when we look at events that unfolded, do we think about health in different ways? And what are we doing when we define health in particular instances? So I can give some practical examples of why that matters and why I would say that health matters for humans and animals. And it was really an eye-opening moment for me to realize that it's not only my own personal health, but that is always a multi-species affair.